Dr. Ross, Clinic Director. Tonight we're going to be going over, obviously, nutrition strategies. Who here has ever been to one of our advanced workshops? Anyone here been to an advanced workshop before? Who here has been to the foundation workshop, the first? Okay, so this advanced workshop builds on top of what we talked about initially, all right? If you remember when we first started telling you guys about lifestyle, how lifestyle impacts your health, and there's three main components to your lifestyle. There's the way you move, exercise, the way you fuel your body, the nutrition, and the way you think, the mental state, the stress part, right? Anything that you do in your life falls in one of those categories. There's nothing that you do in your lifestyle that does not fall into one of those three categories. So the wellness paradigm, meaning that things that you do to promote health, not to fight disease or to treat a condition, but to promote health, working towards something worthwhile, meaning that you're making it better, falls into one of these three categories when it comes to lifestyle. The nexus in the middle is where potential lives. That's where your health lives in terms of how much potential you can live out in regards to your health, your purpose in your life. So when one of these things fails you, all right, this is like a wheel that turns. You want it to run smoothly, right? And if they're all equally, if energy is put into all three of them equally, that wheel will turn pretty smooth. But if you're a person that's really good about eating well, mediocre about exercise, and you suck at how much stress you have in your life, it's still not good, right? You need all three of them working simultaneously, continuously over a period of time. Does that make sense? So tonight, we're going to take this piece alone, just the eat well part. Now, all the slides that you have are not all the slides I'm going to show you. I give you guys important slides, all right? So there might be some slides that you notice I don't have it. That's done purposely because there's some things that obviously I didn't feel that you guys need the slide for. So you guys can take notes as you want. You guys can ask questions at the end so we can get through the material. You can probably understand that when it comes to nutrition, we can be talking about nutrition over probably days on end, right? There's a lot of material to cover. I'm going to try and do this for you guys in less than an hour. I talk fast, listen fast, because we'll go through this more quickly. But again, if you have any questions, just wait till the end. Make sense? All right. So who here remembers this slide when I talked about the paradigm on how in terms of what we're supposed to eat? If you remember, after post-World Wars, there are some macronutrition deficiencies that happen here in America. If you guys remember things like scurvy and rickets, these are macronutrient deficiencies. And what they did is they said, how can we educate people to get the proper macronutrition so they do not die from malnutrition, right? So we developed a food pyramid where it told us that the majority of your calories in a day should come from breads, pastas, and cereals. Inexpensive, high caloric intake, all right, and he covered the macronutrients. And then the rest followed, fruits and vegetables, dairy, fats, and so on and so forth. This today is not supported anymore by the CDC and the FDA, right? This is gone. We said, hey, this model does not work well for our culture anymore. We have an abundance of resources when it comes to food and nutrition now, that we understand that, eating a diet high in cereals, breads, and pastas, probably not the best idea. What have we learned over decades of this? All right, pretty much a lot of it is how it interacts and how it promotes autoimmune issues like allergies, asthma, irritable bowel. But the biggest one is how it's produced a mass amount of, tell me, what disease? Diabetes is one. That's number 3. What's the number 1 disease? Eating a diet rich in heart. Cardiovascular events has taken over this country when it comes to deaths, right? CDC reports there's approximately 736,000 deaths alone attributed to heart disease, all right, each year in this country. So we said, all right, this model doesn't work anymore, right? We need to switch to something different. We need to start educating people on why that model doesn't work and how to switch our paradigm and our mindset into something that works. And what we found that, in 2010, Michelle Obama made a huge push for this, but we went from the food pyramid to the food plate, right? Now here's the hard part, how this change happens, right? This went on for decades. When we knew this model was not working for decades, but the resistance that we get from moving to a model where, again, the majority of your servings of food every day comes from pasta, breads, and cereals, where now we're telling people, hey, 50% of your caloric intake needs to come from live food, live enzymatic properties that are in food, meaning fruits and vegetables, 2-to-1 ratio, meaning that every serving of fruit you should have 2 servings of vegetables every single day. All right? The other 50% comes from whole grains, healthy fats, and proteins. It is a totally 180-degree turn from what we were telling people before. Now, when we talk about generations, because this does not happen overnight, right? Who still thinks that what is being taught in school, that if this is still being taught versus this? Who still thinks that this is still being taught to kids in school? It is. There's still some curriculums at school that have not, again, it's been out for over 5 years, it's approved by the CDC and FDA, but there's still curriculums in school that teach that in health class and nutrition class that the food pyramid still is a viable way to eat. All right, again, increase in diabetes, increase in heart disease, increase in cancer, most particularly the number 1 cancer that causes deaths in this country is colorectal cancer. If you take away prostate for male, breast for female, colorectal cancer is number 1 cancer, 100% preventable colorectal cancer through lifestyle habits. All right? And then you see dairy on the outside of the plate. What do you think it signifies when dairy is not on the main plate? What do you think that means? Give me an idea.
Don't need it.
It's optional, right? And like I've told you guys before, if you've been to any of the other previous consults or workshops that we do, that I think a lot of lobbyists and efforts were made to make sure that dairy gets on there because of the huge dairy industry that we have in this country. All right? So what we're gonna break down tonight is this. How do you achieve this? Because how many of you think you're doing a pretty good job of this?
Okay.
It's tough, isn't it? It's hard. But not only tough for you, but think about how your kids need to learn this, right? Because all these problems of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, it's not going to be resolved in a generation, unfortunately. Because these are generational diseases. They've taken time to get to the numbers that we see today. And there's not going to be a magic surgery, a pill that's going to save this epidemic that we see in heart disease. It has to be a cultural change. All right, it's called a tipping point. We have to build enough momentum where it becomes commonplace. And right now, this is nowhere near commonplace. All right? So, where we've been, where we're going. All right? Where we've been, if you remember our ancestors, hunters and gatherers, right? We ate live food, right? We gathered our own food, we prepared our own food, right? Industrialization happened and, we became overscheduled and over-obligated, and now we don't have time to do that anymore, right? Where cycles of food is expedited through growth hormones and things we put in soils, and we have genetically modified foods now to make sure that growth cycles are half of what they used to be. So we are now living in the processed food world, right? And it's almost impossible to escape processed foods, right? I'm sure all of you, to some degree, eat some percentage of your diet is through processed food. And here in America, it's almost impossible not to do that, right? So how do we actually need to go back, because history is a great lesson in terms of what we've done right and what we've done wrong, So if we go back and we say, when we ate diets of nuts and berries and fruits and vegetables, we were a lot healthier, right? We also didn't have as much stress. So what has this done to our population over time? Well, the biggest thing that it's done is it's created a diet and how it responds to the body in terms of how the body has a hard time processing it. See, the physiology of our body hasn't changed. We still have one gut, a large colon, a small. That has never changed over time. What we put in it has changed. All right. So how we process those foods and what it does to our body. So, for example, this is from the book. Have you ever heard of the book, Are You Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired? It's written by Dr. Robert Batman, that's his name. And he talks about what processed food in terms of how it really depletes people's energy, it depletes people's immune systems. But what he did under photoelectric light, he burned certain foods to see how much energy they released. So what he did is he took a cooked hamburger, and he burned it under the photoelectric light, and it emitted between 3 to 7 megahertz of energy. All right? Then he took a lentil and did the same thing, and this is what it looked like. All right? It emitted over 150 megahertz of energy. All right? So his point is that, you know, people that lack energy or lack vitality is also what we're putting, fuel like a car, what we're putting in our bodies, right? If you're putting food that is dead, processed, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get death, right? If you put live food in your body, guess what you're going to get? Life, right? That's a pretty basic, simple rule to follow. It makes so much sense, but we have a hard time implementing it in our day-to-day life. So I always tell people, you know, the 3-day rule. You know, how do you know what's a dead food versus a live food? You know, if you take the food and you leave it on the counter and you walk away from it and you come back to it in 3 days, if it still looks the same, smells the same, all right, hasn't changed color, it's most likely a dead food. But if it starts to change, like it starts to degenerate, degrade, rot, smell, that means there's live enzymes in there that's working. It's a live food. It's a good food, right? It's just the time that you're supposed to eat it. But that is the difference between life and death for a lot of people. And that's what really this new food plate really talks about is, you know, how much life does it give us? The other thing that is done following the food pyramid is that it's created an issue of obesity in this country. I'm sure you guys have heard about this already. Our obesity rates in this country are climbing every single year. The most startling figures that are coming in from the CDC are actually how kids fall into this category. How do we measure this? What's the international language of obesity? How it's measured is through body mass index. Everyone has heard of body mass index. This is the formula to follow. You take your body weight in pounds divided by your height in inches, divided by your height in inches again, you multiply it by 703, and that gives you a number. All right? Don't ask me why 703. I keep telling you I'm not the one smart enough to develop this equation, but it gives you a number. If you're between 20.0 and 24.9, you're considered a healthy weight. All right? If you're over 25 to 29.9, you're considered obese. If you're over 30, you're considered, you're considered overweight between 25.0 to 29.9. If you're over 30, you're considered obese. If you're under 20, you're considered malnourished. All right? All right? 75% of Americans fall under what category?
Overweight.
Overweight. All right? 25 plus. All right? How many of those 75% fall under 30 and over? Any idea? It's about 34%. All right? How do we compare to other countries when it comes to this? Because the World Health Organization uses the same statistics. All right? How do you think we compare? Average?
Number one.
Yeah, we are. For an industrialized country, we have some of the highest BMI numbers amongst adults in our society. All right? Direct correlation to diabetes, cancer, heart disease. All right? Now, how do you know where to be in this? If you want to calculate it between 20 and 25, you said, well, there's a lot of margin there in terms of where you can go plus or minus. It all depends on your, you guys probably heard me talk about this, your phenotype. If you remember, there are 3 types of phenotypes you probably learned in high school biology. There's the endomorph, the mesomorph, and the ectomorph. The endomorph is the round-shaped person, right? Shorter, round-shaped. The ectomorph is the tall, beanstalk type of genetic type, right? And the mesomorph is the muscle guy, broad guy, or female that, you know, has to walk sideways through a doorway. You are always a mixture. You have a dominant recessive type of mixture, right? You're either going to be dominant endo, and you might be recessive meso. But your primary dominant phenotype will always dictate where you fall on the scale. If you're endo or meso, rounded or the muscle person, you're always going to be on a 23, most likely higher plus side of that equation. If you're ecto, the tall beanstalk, never gains a pound, eats whatever they want, you're going to be closer to the 20. Okay? So if we look at this in terms of the map, and this is from the reported and published on the CDC website that if we compare how the trends have changed, 1985, this is what we saw in terms of BMI, normal BMI numbers, which is BMI numbers that are over 30, all right, for a person that's 5'4". You can see there's a few states that, you know, have a percentage of people between, you know, that's kind of skewed, but under 10% and between 10 to 14%, right? We jump approximately 20 years to 2006, and that's how the map looks like in 2006, all right? We have some states that are 30% of the population have a BMI over 30, right? And then a lot of states that have a BMI of over between 25 and 29% of over a BMI of over 30, right? There is no state that does not have a percentage of BMI people over 30. That was in 2006. What do you think it looks like today? Worse or better?
Worse.
Of course, it's worse, right? So things have to change. There's no doubt about it. So another thing that America has done really well at is, you know, how they've skewed body imaging, right? If you bought an article of clothing 20 years ago and you say, you know, what does a size small and a size medium and a size large looks like compared to what a small, medium, large is today, you guys realize it's not the same, right? It's changed as the culture has changed, right? So the CDC currently states that a healthy waistline for a male is 40 inches, all right? And for a female, it's 35. Now, to me, that sounds ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that a healthy waistline for a male should be 40 inches, right? But this is the standards that we live now here in America. What is considered normal, all right? So, it's all around us, the effects, causes, and what we're up against. It's a huge battle. So how do we tackle this? So why does a diet that is rich in processed food, what does it do? So this is now where we're going to get into the nuts and bolts. It basically comes down to one thing. You know, how much free radicals does it produce in your body? Free radicals are unstable electrons. If you guys remember chemistry, it has one electron on the outer ring of a free radical, and it either can give it up or take it from or attract another electron. And free radicals turn into processes in your body that create disease. Tumors are riddled with free radicals, right? Cancer cells, free radicals. Plaque in your arteries, free radicals. Inflammation, free radicals, right? Different types of cholesterols are free radicals. So a diet high in processed food, what it does, it creates an environment where these free radicals can reproduce at an enormous rate. So our normal body pH level should be 7.365. That's a healthy normal body pH level. And that diet of that food plate that's what it's trying to create. It's trying to create a slightly alkaline body environment. How do you know what your pH is? There's a few ways you can do this. There's some really accurate ways you can do it. You can actually buy a pH kit at Whole Foods, Sprouts, People's Pharmacy, and you test your urine first thing in the morning, midstream, and it'll give you a very accurate pH level of your body. The other way you can test it is using litmus paper. If you have a pool or your child is in school in a science lab, it's really inexpensive to buy, but test your saliva right when you wake up. It's a more broader range. It doesn't give you more accuracy than a urine test, but it'll give you an idea of where you stand. And I can guarantee you 9 out of 10 adult Americans will have an acidic environment. I mean, averaging between 3 and 4. Anyone with cancer has an acidic environment. They've proven this. Heart disease, acidic environment. Because see, cancer cells can't reproduce in alkaline environments. Plaque cannot produce in alkaline environments. You know, we've discovered this, we know this. That's why, you know, they push so much that lifestyle when you are diagnosed with cancer and heart disease, why diet plays such a huge role in fighting these diseases, because it literally stops the reproduction of these free radicals to progress the disease. Especially if you have predisposition in your family to high cholesterol, heart disease, this is even more important for you. why a slightly alkaline body environment is absolutely needed. All right, how do you achieve it? So, free radicals, where do they come from? We talked about the foods that they come from, but they also come from other parts in our lifestyle. You know, if you smoke, makes sense. Very acidic, produces free radical. Excessive alcohol, diets high in fats, especially saturated fats, unsaturated fats as well. I'll give you an example of a unsaturated fat. Any idea? Just what's that? Oil, different types of oils, absolutely. You know, vegetable oils, shortenings, you know, all of them are considered polyunsaturated fats. You know, medications that we take have huge acidic properties, excessive sun exposure, radiation. If you you know, live near refineries, pesticides, you know, different types of furniture polishes, cleaning products that we use, heavy metals, paints, excessive exercise. That's a key one, because a lot of us think, you know, more is better sometimes, but people that do extreme exercise, that, remember I told you about the wheel, and they're really big on exercise, but they don't put a whole lot of energy into you know, managing their stress or diet. This is why that imbalance, where the body perceives a lot of high exercise, it actually, because of the constant repairing of the body, produces free radicals in an acidic environment. No surprise that fried foods and barbecued foods do this as well. And trauma. And we talk about trauma, and everyone thinks, oh, physical trauma, right? Produces, yeah, it does, because anytime there is an injury to the body, it produces clotting factors, and it has to heal and scar, inflammation, all acidic types of properties. But you also have to think of traumas in terms of non-physical. Give me a non-physical trauma that your body can go through that can produce acidity. What's that?
Death.
Death. Absolutely. You know, can produce high acidic environments because of the stress hormones that are released during these type of events, especially cortisol, that produces tons of free radicals. Because a lot of people that have stress or have this type of trauma, those hormones that are dumped into your blood, they're not used the way they're supposed to. I mean, that usually we're sedentary, and those hyperactive, those hormones that create hyperactivity, like extra strength, you know, or in stress type of environments, we're sitting in a chair, and that's why it can produce high amounts of free radicals. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So, how do you reduce your exposure? Obviously, staying away from the stuff we just talked about, that's a no-brainer, right? But how do you, if you already are in these modes where you've done this for years and your body is just, you know, you say, hey, Dr. Russ, I've had a diet that has been acidic for decades. And I've fed my children this way. How do I reverse this process in our bodies? Because it's always reversible. Harder for others depending on your genetic makeup, but it's still possible. All right. And the best way to do it is to reduce the amount of foods that are processed. All right. As you understand that as we age, our metabolism slows. The average American after the age of 30 gains how many pounds? Any idea?
40.
2 pounds a year. The average American after the age of 30 will gain 2 pounds a year. All right? So as metabolism decreases, metabolism is how fast your body burns calories. What do you think we should do to our caloric intake? Reduce it, right? So if you want to keep a healthy BMI, the only way to reduce it is what they recommend, that for every decade between 30 and to the end of life, that you're reducing your caloric intake by 10%. All right? That means that you do not eat the same caloric intake when you're 30, when you're age 50. It has to come down, all right? Because our metabolism slows down. For a lot of Americans, it's an inverse law. As metabolism goes down, guess what we do? We eat more, right? Reduce intakes of iron and copper. Where is iron found? What food? Number one.
Spinach?
It is, but that really doesn't, people don't eat high amounts of spinach in America. That's not the problem. Where is the problem? High amounts of iron. Where? What type of food?
In beef.
Red meat.
Red meat.
We love consumption of red meat. And how about foods that are copper enriched are things like breakfast cereals, baked goods that have high amounts of shortening in it, margarine, those things you should all stay away from. Increased cruciferous vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, will actually act as a antioxidant. Now, new word. We understood what free radicals are. Bad, acidic, creates disease, obesity, diabetes. What do you think an antioxidant does to a free radical? Kills it.
Kills it.
Absolutely. It gets rid of it. All right? It takes that unstable electron away from it. All right? And it almost like depolarizes it. And an antioxidant, you want tons of these in your body. All right? Again, the people who this is most susceptible to, heart disease people, cancer people, people that are susceptible to diabetes, that you want to have a diet full of antioxidants. So they did a lot of studies, and what they found out, no surprise, people that eat a lot of antioxidants, guess what they do?
Live longer.
They live longer. Imagine that, right? That food plate is all about that, all right? Dark leafy green vegetables. This is why they tell you to eat double the amount of vegetables to fruit ratio, all right? Because of this one reason, how much antioxidants you can get from it. So, we talked about the fruits and vegetables. Potassium-rich foods and magnesium foods. So these are all, again, in fruits and vegetables, but these are your sprouts, your legumes, your nuts, fish. And then we're going to talk about trans fatty acids and partially hydrogenated oils that produce a lot of inflammatory. The number one place that partially hydrogenated oils are found in what? What type of food? Those boxes on the corner of every neighborhood. What are they?
Cereal box?
No. I mean, talking these restaurants that serve food out the window. What are they called?
Fast food.
Fast food, right?
Yeah.
The staple of the American diet, right? Anything that's deep fried, tons
Yeah.
of hydrogenated oils, all right? Tons of acidity, a lot of free radicals, all right? You want to stay away from this. It produces tons of inflammation. When people say inflammation, they think, oh, a joint that's inflamed. I'm talking about inflammation in your gut, in your arteries, all right? That's the inflammation that hurts you the most, because when you have an inflammation in these organ systems, it produces tons of plaque and degeneration, all right? We talked about animal and why, the iron and how acidic animal fat is, and this is the reason why. And if you've ever had beef, and they usually will advertise, 28 days aged, right? And you guys think, oh, the longer it's aged, what? What does that interpret?
The better it is.
The better it is, because it's more
Tender.
right? When you can cut through a steak with your fork, you don't have to use a knife, you're like, oh my goodness, this is the best thing ever. Well, why does that happen? Why do you think the longer it sits, the more tender it gets?
Gets fatter. More fat.
Well, when we slaughter animals, the way that it's processed, right? Some of the uric acid from the bladder seeps back into the meat, all right? And that uric acid, the longer that it sits into the flesh of the meat, the more it breaks it down. The more it breaks it down, that uric acid, the more tender it gets. People that have high uric acid levels get what?
Gout.
Gout, right? And usually people that have gout are high in red meat consumption and alcohol, right? So just know that the more tender the meat you're eating, the more urine you're ingesting. Basically, all right? But the more uric acid that's in there that comes from the bladder of the animal. What type of meat that this process does not affect when it's processed? Red meat, that is what? Kosher. Kosher meat does not have uric acid or very, very trace amounts of it, because the way they slaughter the animal, they do it differently where none of that uric acid backs up into the animal. That's why it's flavorless. All right? But that's one of the biggest things. So, arachidonic acid is the source of that acidity once it sits in there from that uric acid. So, what are the big contenders in this? Obviously, the red meat, organ meat, pork, beef, lamb. Even dairy, high amounts of acidity. We talked about this before. Shellfish as well. All right, antioxidants. How do we kill these free radicals? The biggest foods you can eat actually come from garlic and onion. All right, huge antioxidant properties. It's actually recommended that you have at least 2 to 3 meals a week with garlic or onion. Now, why is sugar such a big issue? We used to understand that, you know, the high-fat diets were bad for us. Fat, if you eat high-fat diet, that means you got fat, right? But we've done a really good job of paying all the attention to high-fat diets, and we kind of really haven't paid a whole lot of attention to the amount of sugar consumption that's been going on. Because if you look at any processed food, what is usually the number one ingredient? Some derivative of sugar, which is what?
Fructose.
Fructose, right? So sugar is very acidic to our body. It creates a lot of free radicals. It takes a lot of acidic environment, but also a huge caloric intake, right? So when we talk about sugar, they just announced from the CDC a couple of weeks ago that they changed what the daily requirement or the daily limits of how much sugar we should have in our bodies on a day-to-day basis. What do you think the CDC recommends as an adult? How many grams of sugar that we should not exceed more? What's the maximum amount of sugar we should exceed as adults in America? How many grams? Any idea?
15.
How much?
15.
Close, 25.
Oh.
Okay, no more than 25 grams of sugar a day. Now you guys think, oh, sugar. I mean, we're talking about sugars where carbohydrates turn into sugar that comes from your fruits, that it should not exceed more than 25 grams a day. For children, depending what age, it should be no more between 8 to 15. All right? Guess what the average American consumes?
More than that.
45.
75 to 100 grams of sugar a day. All right? You wonder why type 2 diabetes is such a problem, right? But they did this study that, you know, if you consume that much sugar in a day, guess what it does to you? It kills your immune system. Neutrophil activity. These are activities in your immunoglobulins that kill non-self proteins. So when during the flu season, during cold seasons, when everyone's susceptible to get sick, if your diet is high in sugar, your immune system decreases by 50%. All right. So let's look at this. What season's coming up now? Fall. What does that mean here?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, Halloween, Christmas, New Year's, we overindulge, and definitely with sugar, right? At the same time all this is happening, all right, the flu is acting up. Really, in the northern states, colds, flus, everyone's more susceptible because the reduction in temperature actually robs energy from our immune system to keep our bodies warm, all right? So that's why flus spike at this time of the year. All right. So if your child consumes this much amount of sugar, you already compromise your immune system by 50%. What do you mean their chances of getting the flu and colds are? Probably pretty high, right? They would say, hey, no, just get the flu shot. Right? So we put almost a non-living virus in our bodies to kind of create the antibodies. So if we recognizes it, it will kill it, right? And that's fine. You think about it, that makes a lot of sense. But if you continue to riddle that body with that amount of sugar year after year after year, has this immune system got any stronger? So then when we start getting what has happened, what happens to the flu shot now? About years ago, there might have been one strain in it. Now how many are there in?
There are 3? Oh, 5.
This year there's 5 strains in it. Because the problem just escalates. We're just putting a Band-Aid, another Band-Aid, but we're not looking at the real issue. Now, how effective has a flu shot been to our culture? No one ever talks about after the flu season, well, how good was it? How good did we match the virus from the flu vaccine to after the flu, right? No one ever looks at those numbers. They always say, oh, we got it this year. We got a better match this year. Everyone should get the flu shot, right? Well, if you look at the numbers from 2014 to 2015, all right, it was 13% effective, all right? And you can get all this information from the CDC. The year before that, it was 9% effective, all right? Last year, a little bit better. It was about closer to 20% effective because they keep adding viruses to get that number up higher. But what I tell parents, I say, Dr. Ross, would you give your kid the flu shot? So let's back it up a little. What are you doing with their diet? Because if you just change this number alone, guess what you've just done to their immune system? Better than any vaccine.
Built it up.
I promise you. Better than any vaccine will ever do. And not only for that season, but for the rest of their
Adult life.
right? even vitamin D, right? Just increasing vitamin D during the flu season increases their immunity as well, right? We need to start looking at, not just, hey, how do we treat all these diseases, and how do we make our body stronger? And this is a big one for kids, you know. So my little boy started kindergarten this year, so we're learning, you know, what all this means, and he comes home near the first couple days of school, quick story, and he says, Daddy, you know, there's a cafeteria, and if you put money on the card, he goes, I can get lunch at school. I said, that's good. I said, so he brings home the menu, you know, and they come home with folders every day, and the menu for the month for what's in the cafeteria to eat. I mean,
It's bad.
it's horrendous, right? Every Friday is pizza day, all right? And every day during the week, there's at least chicken and waffles, fried chicken and waffles for lunch, right?
Wow, that's.
You know, and you know, there's chicken tacos and all these things. I'm like, I mean, when I talk about how much do you think we've implemented that paradigm of the food plate versus the food pyramid, we're nowhere close. You know, we're teaching our kids that. They're getting fed in school, and we don't even have enough time to go into how this responds to their academic ability. You know, how it influences their neurological development, how well they can pay attention, how well they can focus and concentrate when we're just putting tons and tons, you know, of acidic food, sugar in their body. There was this article that was published, I think last week, in the paper. You know, it just goes over the numbers from the World Health Organization that, you know, industrialized countries around the world, that people worldwide gain weight over the holidays, right? No surprise there. But what the article really talks about is when we gain that weight over the holidays, guess what happens to it?
It's hard to take it out.
We don't lose it.
Yeah.
And it just accumulates every year, every single year.
Winter sets in and you don't exercise.
Right. So let's talk about strategy. So how do we get more antioxidants, foods in our body to kill that free radical, get our bodies into the alkaline? Is fish. You know, one of the biggest things we can do is fish, because it gives you an essential fatty acid, EPA and DHA, and fish, not shellfish, but fish produces good things for your heart and your brain. All right, what's the ratio? How much of this should you consume? All right, and we can go into organic versus non-organic, small fish. I mean, we don't even have time for all that. I'm just giving you guys, you know, the tip of the iceberg. But we should be eating fish at least 2 to 3 times a week.
But if you eat fish every day, is that okay?
No, because you need variety. Now, there's another slide I'll get to that'll show you how I split this up. All right. So, what is the best type of fish to eat? So, northern Atlantic fish is always better. It's cleaner. There's less impurities in it. All right. So, give me an example. I think it's up here. Tuna. Yes, salmon is one of our best choices in terms of a North Atlantic type of fish. Tuna would be second. You know, there's a lot of other varieties, but you know, a lot of you who can't do that every week, guess what you have to do? You have to supplement this. There's no other choice, all right? Because it's an essential fatty acid, meaning your body does not produce it. It has to be ingested, all right? And a lot of you say, you know, why is flaxseed better than fish? Flaxseed can give you the omega-3 properties that it needs for your body, but you need to consume a whole lot more of it because it's less bioavailable than fish. Right? Fish is an easy source to do it, or the supplement form. So, where we talked about that, let me go. Yes, here's the ratios. So the ratio should be, so we have, there's three main sets of fatty acids: omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9, right? Omega-6 or omega-9 we get tons of through natural diet. Omega-3 is the one we get in trouble with, all right? A normal ratio of omega-6 to 3 in a healthy person, and this is back when we were hunters and gatherers, should be 1 to 1, all right? The ratio should be 1 to 1. What they deem okay, not ideal, should be as high as 4 to 1, omega-6 to omega-1. The average American ratio is 10 to 25 to 1, right? If you have a ratio of this, there's no doubt you have an acidic environment in your body. And you do, there's no question, all right? So if you need to get these ratios down, the best way to do it is, I really believe, through supplementation, right? I take an omega-3 fatty acid supplement every single day. My kids, my little girl who's almost 2 years old, my little boy who's 5, take omega fish every single day. When they were born, we used to squirt it in their mouth with a little syringe. I don't know how much went down, but we gave it to them, right? Because we knew that how important an alkaline body does for development as well. All right, so that's how important it is. We talked about vegetables. Daily consumption every single day, right? We need to have a 2-to-1 ratio. There's no question you have to have the dark leafy green vegetable. That means that you have to have it in every meal. There's some form or some way that dark leafy vegetable has to be in that meal. Now, they've come up with these pretty cool tricks. So, and this has been, you can tell we use this because my little boy actually used this for breakfast this morning. But they have plates now that help kids understand what a healthy meal looks like, just like the food plate. All right, he understands that, hey, this half of the plate needs to be with fruits and vegetables, mostly 2-to-1 ratio, right? And then the portion of some sort of protein, lean protein, and then a whole grain, right? So he knows that all 3 of them have to be filled, right? And he can just kind of eat one. He has to eat all of it. He knows that that's a good thing, that's healthy for him. I mean, like that's literally how primitive and elementary we have to make it now, right? I can promise you the cafeteria at school does not use this. All right? But it's a great source, tool for kids. And we probably need them for adults too. All right? All right. We talked about fruits. I'm going to skip through that. Grains and fibers. How much fiber should you eat? Well, it's recommended that, 25 grams for a woman, 38 grams for men per day of fiber to make your colon work. All right? This is important for colorectal cancer because if your bowels are not moving properly, guess what happens when fecal matter stays in your rectum and your colon? What do you think happens to the tissue that's holding it?
Breaks down.
It's septic, right? When it becomes septic, it breaks it down, but really what happens, all those septic properties seep back into your bloodstream. So you need to be evacuating. If you ever talk to a mechanic, they always tell you, the engine is only as good as the exhaust. All right? Without the exhaust, the engine can't work. No different with our bodies, right? We need that exhaust system to work. So these are just guidelines, but you need to be eating enough fiber where you're having 1 bowel movement a day. All right? If you're taking in 20 grams of fiber, you're not moving your bowels once a day, it's not enough. You got to keep increasing the fiber until you're having 1 bowel movement a day. There's a lot of aids you can use to do this, where you can buy like super concentrated fiber additives to your water, to your meals. They'll help you do that. You can get it through food. Guess where the best food to get fiber from? Dark leaf vegetables, right? Some of the best soluble and bioavailable fiber you can get. All right. So if you increase your fiber, though, the rule of thumb is you also got to increase your water. All right. Now, we're going to talk about water here in a second. I'm going to pass through nuts and seeds, and let's get into some liquids, all right? Because a lot of our calories that we consume, this doesn't come from solid foods. It also comes from liquids, right? Give me the #1 source of caloric intake from a liquid as Americans that we consume.
Coffee.
Coke.
Close.
Coke.
Good? Close. But what do you think? High caloric. A lot of people don't realize that alcohol has tons of calories in it.
I was gonna say.
All right? Not only calories in alcohol, but sugar. All right? Hard liquor, tons of sugar in it. All right? So you're getting a double punch there, not only because alcohol has a lot of acidic properties, but there's also tons of sugar in it. So what acts as an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory is tea, but the key with tea is this. You cannot add dairy to it, because as soon as you add dairy to tea, you've just killed all the antioxidant properties. All right? And then wine. Wine has tons of antioxidant properties, especially what type of wine? Red wine. How much red wine should you drink?
Bottle.
True. No. 2 to 3 servings a day. A week. All right.
Wow.
So what is a serving of red wine? How many ounces?
8, maybe 6.
6 to 8 ounces. Yes. So literally 6 to 8 ounces, right? Not these goblets that you see, right? 6 to 8 ounces, 2 to 3 servings every week. I'm going to go back to nuts. as well, because some of the benefactors from nuts and seeds as well have a lot of antioxidant properties. Well, we should be eating at least 1 to 2 servings a couple times a week, at least once a week, but handful is considered 1 serving of nuts. But you can easily do this with salads, right? Throwing flaxseed or sesame seed in your salad, and you get tons and tons of anti-inflammatory properties from nuts and seeds that way. All right? Okay. Talking about alcohol, wine is the best. Stay away from hard liquor. No more than 3 drinks per week. I should say per week, not per day. Let's move on to water. I can go through all the science of water, but basically, our body is made up anywhere between 65 to 75% water. All right, we have to replenish that every single day. So the rule of thumb is on the next slide here. It's you should be intaking about half your body weight in ounces ideally, but it also depends to your lifestyle in terms of what you do. If you have a high activity level, you need to be drinking more water. And also, if you drink a lot of acidic beverages, which are coffee, sodas, all right, you need to replace, if you drink 6 ounces of coffee a day, you add that onto the equation. If you drink a soda a day, that's 8 ounces, you add 8 ounces of water to your diet every single day. All right, because these types of beverages actually deplete your body, right? When you feel thirsty, how depleted of water are you? Does anyone know? You're
already over your.
Right. Anyone wants to know what's the percentage of dehydration you have by the time you have the sensation of thirst? It's about 30%. Your body's already 30% dehydrated by the time, for average person, that your brain signals you to have a thirst sensation. All right. You never want to get to that. All right? You always want to stay ahead of the curve. Okay, so let's talk about also now what we eat, but how we eat, because this is important as well. So let's talk about us compared to other countries. When do we consume the highest caloric meal of the day? Dinner, at the end. All right? When do we consume the least caloric meal of the day, or none at all?
Breakfast.
At the beginning of the day, right? So we kind of do this. We start off with 0 to low caloric, and we just climb, high caloric, all right? Now, when we expel energy, and this has to do a lot with metabolism, all right? When do we expel most of our energy? During the day, right? Working, whatever we do during the day. At night, what do we usually do with our bodies? We usually start to, go to sleep, right? We start to wind down. So we kind of got this, going on where it's an inverse law again, right? It doesn't make sense. Where it doesn't make sense that we should have more calories during the day, less calories at the end of the day. Give me some cultures that do this. What part of the world eats most of their caloric intake during the day?
Latin America.
Latin America, who else?
Europe.
Europeans do, right.
Asia.
The Asians do, right. And where do you think these countries fall in terms of the World Health Organization, some of the healthiest industrialized countries? They're always near the top, right? Japan, Asian countries, always near the top for healthiest cultures, right? We're number 37 out of 40, and it's a lot of it has to do with the way we do things in cultural trends. But when we eat food, we do better. We know we do better when we graze, right? Less food more often, right? We want to cut down the caloric intake as we age. We want to eat more calories at the beginning of the day than at the end of the day. So it's always a good idea when we talk about this that you end your day with a salad. Always, right? Real easy. Like usually when I go home from here, it's late, and usually I'll always eat a raw leafy green salad, and usually there's some sort of protein on it, like chicken, some fish on it, there's sesame seeds on it, whatever, nuts, shaved almonds, right? And it makes it real easy to acquire this. I almost have no whole grains at the end of the day. I usually consume my whole grains always at the beginning of the day, all right? But these are just, and most of our caloric intake should happen between breakfast and lunch. It's just a really simple fact. We talked about the decreasing the amount of calories. We talked about breakfast. Let's move down. Talked about the fiber. Eat meals more often. Okay, so let's have the dairy conversation. Why did I put yogurt on there if I'm not a big fan of dairy? There's only one reason why. Because what does the property of yogurt have that we need?
Bacteria.
Probiotics.
That's right.
Probiotics.
We need the probiotic factor because the probiotic factor, all right, helps keep our gut healthy. All right, we have healthy bacteria in our stomach, right, and we need that. We need to encourage the growth of that. When you have an antibiotic, and you have an oral antibiotic, guess what it does to that healthy bacteria? It destroys it. It kills it because it does not discriminate between bad and good bacteria. Even though it might be necessary for whatever infection you're fighting, but there's also repercussions to that. So I always tell patients, if you have an antibiotic, right after you're done taking that 5-day, 10-day, for whatever reason why they gave it to you, guess what you should do immediately after? A probiotic, right? Because you've just depleted your immune system without having that healthy gut flora. But to keep it maintained, we need a probiotic. Acidophilus bacillus is the most common strain of that bacteria in our gut, and you need to put it in there. Now, yogurt has that, right? But yogurt also has the dairy properties of it. So that's the only reason why I would say yogurt to eat yogurt is for that property alone, not because of dairy. But you can get the probiotic by itself by taking a supplement. Yeah. But if you're not into supplements, you want it more naturally, yogurt's going to be your best way of having it. And one serving of yogurt a day will accomplish that. All right? Okay, so let's talk about meal planning. Okay, so snacks. My kids love snacks all the time. So what should snacks consist of? We talked about what they should be in during mealtime, but snacks should always have something in it where they're enticed to eat it as well. So, a little bit of chocolate, because chocolate, especially dark chocolate, actually has good antioxidant properties. Again, everything in moderation, right? So if you do like celery with, ants in a log, with cashew butter or almond butter, those are great snacks to have, right? A little bit of chocolate, dark chocolate, those are good things to have as snacks, mixed with nuts, seeds, all good stuff. We talked about meals, but salads and meals should happen almost every single day. Like I talked about, this is what I do. I put beans on salads, protein, fish, chicken, whatever it may be. I'm not a big fan of deli meats, but you can use the same type of lean proteins, which are fish and chicken, your biggest ones, in sandwiches with a whole grain bread. Dinners. Oh, here's someone asked me about how you should split this up. So this is what this is the way I would recommend it. You have 2 meals a week with chicken, 2 meals a week with fish, 1 meal a week with red meat, and 2 meals a week with no meat or fish. Over the whole weekend, and you obviously split it up how you desire. But that's a good guideline to follow. If you're a person that loves your meat and potatoes, and you're having red meat 2, 3, 4 times a week, not a good idea. All right, you're headed towards that cardiac arrest type of lifestyle. All right. Non-meat meals, beans are a good source of that protein, all right? And whole rices, like I don't know if you guys have ever eaten couscous, really good sources, quinoa, all good stuff. We talked about the wine. That wine's in there quite a bit, isn't it? Superhero health, I've talked about this, this emulates that plate. But the biggest thing I tell people, as much as adults should be following this, how much we have to ingrain this in the minds of children. We have to do it. If we're ever going to see numbers drop when it comes to obesity, diabetes, cancer, we have to constantly be pushing this type of lifestyle. You notice I say lifestyle, not diet. Right? Because everyone perceives a diet that you do it for a period of time, you get to an ideal weight, or you lose 10 pounds, you've reached your goal, and then you go back to the way you were. That's not what this is intended to be. This is a lifestyle, right? In our culture, it's hard. This is probably going to be the toughest generation that we need to implement because we're the first generation to do it, right? But as things move along, we gain momentum, and we start seeing statistics in terms of obesity and all these diseases. These numbers start to decline. There's going to be, like I said, a tipping point where it becomes commonplace. All right. And I got to put this part into it because, you know, the diet is great, and we do that, and we can implement all these 3 strategies, eat the foods that are important to us. But, you know, when people say, Doc, there's no way that I can, I have heart disease because my parents had heart disease. I'm obese because, I have a genetic predisposition to be obese, or diabetes. I'm like, we do sick. You don't get sick. You do it, right? Through how you eat, how you move. So when it talks, I have to talk to you about exercise. Because even the caloric intake that you take in, if you're not burning it, and exercise has so many other benefits in your life, and other than just being fit, but cardiovascular, mentally, brain health. But according to the CDC, we should be exercising at 80% of our max heart rate, 30 minutes a day, 4 to 5 times a week. All right. How many of you say that you got that? Right? And these are minimum requirements. But that's what we should be doing. 4 to 5 times a week, 30 minutes, 80% of your max heart rate. How do you do this? Real easy stuff. You don't need a whole lot of elaborate equipment. Like a bike, a run, elliptical. Walking does not do it. All right, walking does not get your heart rate up enough to get you that 80% max heart rate. If you want to know what your 80% of your max heart rate is, you can type it into Google. They'll give you the formula. You put in your age, your height, and all that, your weight, and they'll give you your max heart, what it is, and what you should be exercising, and what your goal is for that. So this was in the paper a couple of years ago, and I clipped it out. I've used it in a lot of my talks, but kind of what our culture has gone to, where your mom goes, Junior, it's time to take your Lipitor, and everyone knows what Lipitor is, right? It's a cholesterol-lowering drug. Tons of people are on it. Statins in America. And it says, no, not now, Mom. I'm playing baseball, right? Behind a computer, right? Like the electronic age where we're stuck behind a tablet, a phone, the soft drink in his hand. He's overweight. It's just hilarious. This is my family. And if you ever meet my family, and I've always talked about them because I always say that my kids, and that's Gavin, that's Presley, I always say that my human experiment, right? My human experiment because, we try so hard. We try so hard to implement everything that I'm teaching you guys and showing you guys, lifestyle. And I'm doing the walk with you, not only for myself, but for, like I said, the next generation. And I'm telling you, it is tough. It is so hard because the outer influences that we have, right? Now that he's in a public school system, it's opened our eyes up so much. Like, there is a ridiculous amount of opportunities where you go wrong. In terms of diet, but even exercise. How much limited exercise they get now in school, and in the amount of time. We have a competitive environment, do we not? Academically, in this culture, we have a competitive environment, and I just feel we just don't give our kids the opportunity to flourish and develop the way they should, because it is so competitive. But we don't set up the foundation for them to thrive on, right? So, if you feel that you do things differently, because we feel all the time, well, why doesn't your kid eat our cupcakes? Well, if you have an hour, I'll tell you, right? But this is why, and you feel like an outsider sometimes. And I tell people, so why does your kid get the flu shot, right? And again, you're an outsider, right? But I tell them, say, if you know what I knew, you'd be questioning what you're doing as well. Because what are we, most of us? Most of us just follow. We do whatever else is doing, right? We're leaders. We're just followers of who has the loudest voice. But I'm telling you, the results that we're getting are horrible, right? You look at the amount of disease and what our kids deal with nowadays in terms of allergies, and like I said, autoimmune diseases and asthmas, and just chronic issues that we see in kids. It's ridiculous, and every year these numbers go up. So I always tell people, if you want something different, you got to do something different. If you want different outcomes. So, well, people, go back to the same paradigm. In terms of what we eat, how we move, and how we think. Right? hopefully this helped you with this part account in your life. Next month, our Living to 100 workshop series, our advanced workshop series, is all about how to build your immune system and how to avoid the flu naturally. Should you get the flu shot, how effective the flu shot is. We touched upon it tonight. You know, how to raise your kids to build a proper immune system, you know, all the way from prenatal to adolescence to adulthood. We get to score how well you've done in your life, you know, and so we'll go through all that, and you're more than welcome to join us.